You'll hear it rattle, so this is like a new. That's all you want. Did you want? No. Not till when you ever get a ride on this one. Oh, I love this one.
Good, yeah. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're living during interesting times, and we dedicate our shir once again to the memory of the Bibas family, and that our Torah learning should help the hostages that are still in captivity, and that Hashem should bring them home safely. The first part of what we're going to be discussing today is in the Kuzari, and we're just in the process of finishing the fourth essay. So that's an exciting thing. We're going to be soon finished with the fourth essay. The request that the Khazar king had put forth to the rabbi is, now that you've expressed your confidence that our tradition contains all of the scientific wisdom that is necessary, and that we have as much knowledge of the universe and science and so forth as the other nations do, I wished for you to share me some examples of this great, profound knowledge that we find interspersed in our traditional writings, in our traditional literature, Torah Shebaal Peh, in the Talmud. So we went over a few of them last week, and I want to share with you something that has disturbed me ever since I translated the Kuzari, because it seems to be one of those things which the rabbis got wrong. I don't have a satisfactory answer. So I am presenting to you at the very outset that I will leave you more perturbed and will not provide you with a good solution for this perturbation today. But I did feel that for the sake of honesty, I should present it to you. Here we are trying to present evidence of the rabbi's great scientific knowledge. And what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is doing is showing, you see how well the rabbis understood the animal kingdom. They needed to, for laws of kashrus, primarily, and for other things as well. Apparently, the scientific belief in the 12th century was just as, I guess you could say, primitive by comparison to the 21st century as it was in the period of the Talmud. So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is going to look at the following illustration as something that will put the rabbis on a pedestal, but based on the knowledge that we have today about the anatomy of animals, it actually is not accurate. So I just wanted to put it out there to show you that sometimes the proofs that are brought in medieval works do not age well. And we've talked about this before, that many times when you go through works of this kind, of philosophical works that try to bolster the faith claims of Judaism, you find sometimes things that do age well and sometimes things that don't age well. One has to be selective as a student of Torah and be discriminating and be honest. There are discussions about this that we've talked about in the past. I remember devoting a few years ago one whole shir in the Kuzari to a discussion of the halacha that one is permitted to kill a louse on Shabbos. You're permitted to kill lice on Shabbos. Now, we should never know of such things because, to find a louse in your hair is not a pleasant thing, but it does happen. And the Gemara, and this is codified in Shulchan Aruch, which is written in the 16th century, says that you're allowed to kill a louse on Shabbos. Now, why is it that you're allowed to kill a louse on Shabbos when killing all other creatures, including bugs, is not permitted on Shabbos? Does anyone know the reason? Because, explains the Gemara, lice do not reproduce through the normal method of the fertilization of an egg, like other insects do. Rather, they reproduce spontaneously. They are generated spontaneously from perspiration. In other words, from beads of perspiration that are found in the hair, that's how lice are spontaneously reproduced. Mindy, that's not true?
True. I like Harakin.
How can you dare to contradict the Talmud?
It's having been a nurse and worked in schools.
So you've been a nurse, you've worked in schools, and you know that lice do lay. Okay. So, somebody, just as a reminder to all of our participants online, please mute yourselves, okay? Thank you all. So this is an illustration of how things don't always age well. But the question then becomes, does the halacha change? Yes.
Okay, I want to say no, because the way that I think I can see why you would believe that's how lice procreate, because it's us against them, and they grow so quickly that to have a fighting chance of them not taking over, it's like a real health hazard. You have to.
Yeah. Well, okay, it's a good argument, and there could be, maybe that's the reason. We're not sure 100% why, but the halacha does not change. There were many discussions that we had about this when we gave the shir. We pointed out an article from Rav Carmel in his footnotes to Rav Dessler's Michtav Me'eliyahu, who discussed this very topic. And it seems that because to the naked eye, lice do not reproduce normally, halacha is determined by the reality of the naked eye's perception, not by the perception of the microscope. And that's, of course, why it's acceptable to ingest microorganisms, even though they wouldn't be kosher by the standards of having split hooves and chewing their cud. But a microorganism that you can only detect under a microscope is not considered to be non-kosher, even though it's like really a bug. Now, this doesn't mean that you're exempt from checking your lettuce or your Brussels sprouts for insects. You do, because there's a difference between a camouflaged insect and a microscopic insect, okay? So you do have to check your vegetables for bugs, but you don't have to check your vegetables with a microscope, okay? Because even if you do find something that's microscopic, it's not reckoned with in halacha. And therefore, halachic reality is determined by that which is discernible to the naked eye. So, and, full stop. And that's the reason why many poskim are of the opinion that the halacha does not change. And that's the accepted norm, that it is still, even though this is a leniency, it is still permitted to kill lice on Shabbat. Okay, now, with that in mind, with that introduction in mind, we'll take a look very briefly at this section on page 491. Some examples of the amazing and precise wisdom they possessed regarding the poisonous quality of certain clawed animals. Now, let's see. The halachic import of an animal's claws being poisonous, it says in footnote 360, this is on page 491 in case I didn't mention it, is that it renders the clawed victim treifa, meaning that if a feline animal which has venom in its claws were to tear into or scratch one of my livestock, a goat or a sheep or a cow on my farm, it would, if the venom was injected from its claws, would render the animal treifa, and I could not eat that animal. It's not kosher anymore. Now, regarding this alleged poison in certain clawed animals, which modern science denies, and other similar discrepancies between modern science and Torah Judaism, see Michtav Me'eliyahu, Volume 4, and Yehuda Levi, The Science in Torah, and there are many other works. Rabbi Slifkin, of course, as you know, writes extensively about this as well. Okay, and but we're going to look at it anyway, and we're going to see how Rabbi Yehuda feels that, to the contrary, this is an example of the rabbi's great knowledge of the anatomy of animals. The claws of cats and martens are poisonous to kids and lambs, kids being baby goats, and the claws of weasels are poisonous to birds. This is all from the Talmud. They also said that the claws of foxes and dogs are not poisonous. Now, the Talmud further states poisonous clawing can only be intentional. Poisonous clawing requires that the predator be alive. Poisonous clawing is only with the nails, not the teeth. Poisonous clawing is only with the hand, not the foot. This last phrase means that these predators inject poison into their living prey only with the claws of their forepaw. They also only inject intentionally, not by accident, when their claws get caught in an animal's flesh unintentionally. Okay, now, what is the scientific reality? What caused medieval scientists and people who were experts in husbandry and farming animals, what made them come to this conclusion? Well, it was by observation. They noticed that when an animal when a goat got clawed by a cat, it would develop an infection and would die within a few months. So they thought legitimately that there must be something in the cat's claws that is poisonous. And through experimentation, they determined that there must be some venom in the claws of these cats. What is the reality? What does modern science tell us? There is no venom in cats' claws. What is in cats' claws? Yucky bacteria. That's exactly right. Really yucky bacteria, which means that if you own a cat, you're not my friend. That's number one. Number two, I don't like people with cats. No, but I'll still be your friend anyway. Number two, if you own a dog, I'll be your friend because I love dogs. But people with cats, this is just unusual people, and I won't elaborate any further. But if you do own a cat, it means that feline hygiene is a really important thing because cats transmit disease through the fact that they get bacteria embedded in their claws. Now, some people will declaw their cats for that reason, and also because they don't want to get scratched by their cats, which is a very common thing to do with domesticated cats. But in any event, I wanted you to understand. And by the way, Rav Carmel, in his footnotes to this essay in the Michtav Me'Eliyahu, talks about this idea that perhaps the rabbis perhaps they did have the sophistication to know that it's not actual venom, but it's bacteria. But because they were transmitting information to the masses, they basically told the masses what was understandable to the masses because knowledge of bacterial infections was not known until maybe the 19th century or early 20th century. I'm not even sure. Okay. And what is most amazing, we continue with subparagraph 16, is what they said about the animal having to be alive. This means that if after the predator forced its claw into its prey, we then cut off the claw, we do not have to worry about poison. This is because the animal injects its poison only as it separates from its prey and pulls its claws out of the animal. It is with regard to the aforementioned case that the Talmud makes a point of saying that the predator must be alive, despite the fact that it already said that it must claw intentionally. This is to teach us that even when it clawed intentionally, but afterwards we cut off its claw, the animal, the victim, has not received any of the poison from the clawing cat. And of course, this could very well be that when an animal claws, it does so with malice. When a cat claws, it does so maliciously. And through that malicious sort of instinct that is within the cat, it really pushes its claws really, really deep within the subcutaneous tissue. And as a result, the animal develops an infection. If the animal just does a surface scratch without really embedding itself that deep, maybe the bacteria doesn't have a chance to get under the skin and cause an infection, and maybe that's the issue. We don't know for sure. But again, there are certain areas of medieval science and Talmudic science, which simply don't age as well as others. Many times we discover things that the medieval rabbis knew a lot more than we do. And many times we discover that some of the cures and some of the descriptions of certain medical conditions that they had was the best that was known at that time. Okay? But what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is pointing out is, don't think that the rabbis are more primitive than modern science. They have the same knowledge that we do. And therefore, you don't need to resort to studying medicine outside of the rabbinic tradition, because the rabbis have all of this tradition as well. Now, as you know, we mentioned last week, we don't know where they got this tradition. It seems from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi that they received this as a tradition at Sinai. I mean, it was passed down from generation to generation. Now, if that's the case, then that would be a flawed tradition based on what we know about cats and other medical and scientific conditions today. So it would make more sense that they were very, very studious. The rabbis throughout history were extremely conscientious about being updated regularly on science and medicine, and they incorporated that knowledge into halachic decisions that they made. And it is for that reason that one perhaps could argue that instead of shunning the study of science and medicine from the academy, one should say, well, listen, if we need this knowledge in order to know halacha, then a lot of times it's actually virtuous to study science and medicine, because a lot of times we need to update our knowledge of certain things in order to be able to enhance our Yiddishkeit, not just for medical and scientific halachic issues, but also, you know, if we can learn something new about the origins of our universe that helps to bolster our reading of the first chapter of Genesis, that's amazing. That would be a great thing to do. So it would be a good thing to subscribe to, you know, Scientific American and other journals like that. And it would be a great thing to learn more about modern medicine and cures that we're coming out with, because these things will only enhance our knowledge of Torah. And we'll be able to reverse engineer and go back and say, oh, when the rabbi said that you can't eat this animal, look at this new scientific discovery which points this out. And that perhaps can only enhance our knowledge. But it has to be done with the requisite amount of humility. And what I mean by that is that just as we know that in the 12th century, there were certain things that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi thought were cutting edge medicine and science and turned out to be outdated over the course of time, that they didn't age well. We have to have the humility to say to ourselves that these things that we learn about our reality today may turn out to be outdated sometime in the future. So if we come up with something that helps us bolster our faith in the Torah by using modern science, which is a virtuous exercise, it's something that we find the great rabbis throughout history doing, we have to do so with the understanding that, okay, this scientific model fits into Genesis and fits into the Talmudic discussion in the following ways, but we may end up having to say, okay, if a new discovery is made that basically upends everything that we knew, so then we have to learn how to modify. I mean, I'm looking at the world today and I'm just amazed. Do you know what is being so extolled and praised today? They just came out with a news story that a chain of restaurants is now going to be changing how they make French fries. Instead of boiling their French fries or frying their French fries in seed oil, they're now using tallow, right? And that's much healthier for you, because seed oil is poison, according to the modern science. And like RFK from Trump's new cabinet, you know, who's the head of the, the Department of Health and something or other, he's saying that this is the best thing since sliced bread, you know, that we're now frying our French fries in beef fat instead of vegetable oil. And of course, you know, we all grew up, all of us in this room, we all grew up where if anyone boiled something in beef fat, that was like, feh, you're going to kill yourself. That's why our grandparents lived in only to be 50 or 60 something, and we're living so much longer because they ate gribbinus and kishka and all of these terrible, terrible foods. And now we know so much better. And now everything is being turned upside down. We're frying something in beef fat is much healthier than frying it in vegetable oil. Now, of course, in all fairness, one expert got on and said, all fried food is bad for you. But still, to say that frying French fries in beef fat is better than seed oil, that's a new one on me. But it just goes to show you that modern science is constantly updating itself. And so we have to be careful. The people who are the true idolaters are the ones who worship modern science and modern knowledge. And we have to be careful not to do that. We have to have the humility to know that today, what is the conventional wisdom may turn out to be debunked science in just 10 years from now. And that could apply to anything, whether it's health, whether it's medical knowledge, whether it's scientific knowledge about the universe. So many things we still haven't figured out. But one thing I do have confidence. I have confidence that as we get closer and closer to a true knowledge of the universe, we will learn more about Hashem through that knowledge. And I think that, therefore, one should never view science as the enemy, but rather science is one's friend in helping one be able to recognize Hashem in the universe. We get this directly from the Rambam. Seems like this is what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying as well. And we should have that type of sort of confidence that that's where we are headed. Okay. Yes, Esther.
It presents a real dilemma, obviously, that's why we're talking about it.
Yes.
But is it better to stick to the guidelines that were established in the Talmudic era and in the Middle Ages based on their science and knowledge in the time? So stick with that. Or is it better to at least try to adapt halacha to what we now know as of the moment is the scientific standard?
Well, this is a great question. I think I want to refine your question a little bit more because it's not just limited to halacha. Let's say, so let me ask you this question. The Talmud says that a certain elixir is good to help resolve an upset stomach. And modern medicine would say that that's the absolute worst thing you should take for an upset stomach. It'll create a tremendous imbalance in your electrolytes and you wouldn't want to do it. Which one should you follow? Now, this is your health here. This is not a halachic issue. This is your health in question. Which one are you more inclined to follow?
I follow the scientific.
You would follow the scientific recommendation, and I think I probably would as well. And the reason is, and I'm not sure if everyone would agree with this, the reason is because when the Talmud makes pronouncements about science and medicine, it is not always because they have a tradition that goes back to Moses about it. And we have to appreciate that. Many times when the Gemara talks about how to cure certain ailments, and there's a whole section in the Gemara in Shabbos and in other places, which provides us a lot of medicinal cures. The Gemara is relying on the best known science of its time. And to resort to a medieval cure is speculative at best. And if modern doctors tell you, well, it couldn't hurt, so then maybe you could go ahead and do it. But if they tell you, no, this is contraindicated for your condition and you're going to worsen your condition, I would not follow it, simply because we are over investing in rabbinic knowledge if we say, well, they had a Masorah for the mitzvahs of the Torah, and so therefore they must have had a Masorah on all of medical cures. That's not an accurate statement. If they have a Masorah on everything having to do with the observance of Judaism, it doesn't necessarily indicate that they had a correct Masorah on all medical cures. And I think, look, if you study the Rambam, who was a great doctor and a great scientist by all standards of his time, people, the royalty used to consult the Rambam for his medical knowledge, and he was the private physician for, I think it was either the Caliph or a vizier of some kind that was living in Egypt at the time, and the Rambam himself subscribed to an Aristotelian model of science, which now has been debunked and is considered outdated today. So that doesn't mean that the Rambam that we reject everything that the Rambam says. He was relying on the scientific knowledge of his time and felt that it was a laudable exercise to study science as much as you can to gain a better knowledge of Hashem. And that's all we're suggesting. As far as implementation, one should implement halacha based on what is written in the Shulchan Aruch, as long as it's not contraindicated by modern medicine. I'm hard-pressed to think of an example of where the Shulchan Aruch says to do something when it's not considered healthy, because built into the Shulchan Aruch is the proviso that even when there's a mitzvah, let's say, give you an example, it's a mitzvah to eat matzah the night of the Seder. But the Shulchan Aruch itself says that a chole, if a person is ill, such that, let's say, they cannot tolerate gluten, or they cannot tolerate anything that's made out of grain, then they're patur from the mitzvah. And it would be usher for them to eat matzah on Pesach because it might harm them very seriously, if not kill them. And so built into the halacha is whenever something is not indicated for one's health, one is exempt from the mitzvah, and one is not permitted to try to fulfill that mitzvah. That's true with fasting, and it's true with a number of other things. So I think we'd be hard-pressed to ever find anything where the halacha says one thing and medical science says another thing, unless you can think of an example. All right, Linda, go ahead.
Hi. So yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things. So first of all, there's actually an incident where I was reading an article. I was looking up about the benefits of vinegar, and there was a professor at the Hebrew University who actually had an article about, like a published article about the health benefits. And one of the references he used was from the Rambam, actually, who said that in that time it was healthy. And he actually used it, which is interesting. Probably only in Israel that would happen.
Right, right. This is
But
true.
so there were things. But the thing that I just wanted to say was, I don't really see any difference in like you're saying that okay, there could very well be scientific facts that are valid in the Gemara or in the Talmud, but because we don't, it wasn't. But I think it was on par with the knowledge, scientific knowledge in that era at that time.
Correct.
I think if we had continued nowadays to continue, like if we had commentaries now, continuing comments on the Talmud, and the way it didn't stop, for example, right? And then we were continuing adding to the Gemara and up to date, more modern commentaries, they very well could have included up to date science information that we have learned since in there.
I agree with you, but you have to realize the oral tradition is an ongoing process. That's why we have commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries that have accumulated for centuries. The only thing that we don't change is the psak halacha that comes out of the Gemara. That is the religious things that we do and don't do, which by and large, the vast majority have nothing to do with medicine and science.
So you're saying that there are modern commentators now, but on the Gemara and on the Torah, but do they ever comment on health things or medical things as well? No.
No, that's the rabbis in the post-Talmudic period never saw their role as prescribing proper health. Now, there are exceptions. There are certain Sfarim that have been written throughout Jewish history where the author felt that I need to get this knowledge to the Jewish community, that there are certain things that are good for your health, certain things that are bad for your health, and you'll find them interspersed within different commentaries. But by and large, that was not the project of the rabbinic community. The rabbinic community, since the period of the Talmud, has always said, consult with the medical experts, consult with the scientific experts. And I don't think that anything that we've learned in the Kuzari would contradict that. I think what all the Rabbi Yehuda Levi is trying to demonstrate is that the rabbis of the Talmudic period were not ignorant. They were not primitive. They had as much scientific knowledge as any other civilization, as any other ethnic group. Okay, all right. Let's hold it here, and let me share with you my screen on the Parsha. Just give me 1 second. So this week we're going to be reading Parshas Zachor, in addition to Parshas Tetzaveh. Parshas Tetzaveh talks about the priestly garments, which is in itself an important discussion. But I think especially in light of everything that has been going on in the world around us, I want us to talk a little bit about the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek. I gave a whole shir about this, about the topic of Amalek last year, but I want to just look at the Haftorah for now, because we're going to read a special Haftorah for Parshas Zachor from the Sefer Shmuel, Shmuel Aleph, where the first king of Israel, King Saul, is tasked with the mitzvah to destroy Amalek utterly and entirely. And he fails. He spares King Agag and allows him to reproduce. And from him comes eventually Haman. Haman is known as Haman HaAgagi in the Megillah. And he's called Haman HaAgagi because he descends from King Agag, whom King Shaul was supposed to have killed and failed to do so. And as a result, we've gone through iterations of persecution. And sort of like the perennial lesson to the Jewish people is, just as it is sinful to be discompassionate to someone who deserves mercy, it is also sinful to be compassionate to someone who should not be an object of mercy. When your enemy is trying to kill you, you must kill them first in order to protect yourself and your brother and sister. And that seems to be the message of the Haftorah, the overarching message of the Haftorah. In order to really appreciate the story, we have to go over a few psukim. And so I've translated it in English for the sake of brevity. This is only a portion of the Haftorah that I want us to look in. I know the font's a little bit small, and I apologize for those who are in the room. But Shmuel came to Shaul after Hashem told Shmuel prophetically, Shaul has failed. He has spared Agag. He has spared the women. He has spared the livestock. And this is a very serious offense. And therefore, he can no longer be king. And God actually says, Nichamti, I have regret that I placed King Saul as king. And so part of Shmuel's task now, and this was after Shaul had made other mistakes, but Hashem says this was sort of like the last straw. And Shmuel is now going to have this confrontation with King Shaul after this last failure, and is going to tell him that you can no longer be the king. So when Shmuel came to Saul, Saul said to him, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you to the Lord. I have fulfilled the Lord's command. Then what demanded Shmuel is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of oxen that I hear. Shaul answered, they were brought from the Amalekites, for the troops spared the choicest of the sheep and oxen for sacrificing to the Lord your God. And we proscribed the rest, like we basically said the rest of the livestock are off limits. We just saved enough to offer as korbanot to Hashem. Shmuel said to Shaul, stop. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Speak, he replied. And Shmuel said, you may look small to yourself, but you are the head of the tribes of Israel. Now, what does Shmuel mean by that? You may look small to yourself. Why did Shmuel say that to Shaul? That Shaul, he said to Shaul, you may look small to yourself. So apparently what Shmuel was saying to Shaul is that part of the sin that you have committed is that you have been a populist ruler and have acquiesced to the desires of the people instead of listening to Hashem. Thinking to yourself, I can't aggressively go against the will of the people. But that's diminishing yourself when you're not supposed to. Okay? So sometimes you cannot listen to the popular voices. You have to do what's right. And if Hashem told you that it was right not to spare a single living creature from Amalek, you had an obligation to listen to that. The Lord anointed you king over Israel. And by the way, before I go any further, I do want to point out that there was only one period in history since the initial command to wipe out Amalek to the present where God came to a prophet and said, wipe out the entire people of Amalek. This is the only incident that we know of where there was a specific command to do it in one fell swoop. There was no other period in Tanakh, even though the Jews may have had an opportunity where Hashem said, go to war against Amalek and wipe out every man, woman, and child and every animal. It was a unique situation where the Jewish people were in a position at this unique period in Jewish history to wipe out Amalek once and for all. But there has never been a period in history since then. So no one is advocating, like some of the anti-Semites argue, no one is advocating that there is a mission that the Israelis have to commit genocide. That is not, and that they have labeled Hamas as Amalek, and therefore every man, woman, and child in Gaza needs to be wiped out. That is not the correct way to read this story, because this story only has one application during the times of King Saul. And even though David was the king afterwards, and he could have tried again, but there was never any subsequent mitzvah to wipe out all of Amalek. Okay, so anyway, so you made yourself small, but you are the head of the tribes of Israel. The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission saying, go and proscribe, in other words, completely eliminate the sinful Amalekites. Make war on them until you have exterminated them. Why did you disobey the Lord and swoop down on the spoil in defiance of the Lord's will? Saul said to Shmuel, but I did obey the Lord. I performed the mission on which Hashem sent me. I captured King Agag of Amalek, and I proscribed Amalek, and the troops took from the spoil some sheep and oxen, the best of what had been proscribed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. So in this portion of the story, you see that Shaul doesn't get it. Well, he's basically saying, I think that what I did was to fulfill Hashem's will, even though Hashem said to wipe out everything. But I figured this would give more glory to Hashem if I kept the king alive so that we could make an example of him and to use the animals to offer karbanos to Hashem. Okay, but Shmuel said, do you think God delights in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obedience to the Lord's command? Surely obedience is better than sacrifice, compliance than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, defiance like the iniquity of terafim. In other words, what you have done is as bad as idolatry. You have strayed after your own discretion instead of following to the letter the word of Hashem. Because you rejected the Lord's command, he has rejected you as king. So Shaul said to Shmuel, I did wrong. Now, finally, he's ready to admit it. Okay, I did wrong to transgress the Lord's command and your instructions, but I was afraid of the troops and I yielded to them. Okay, so he admits, now he's doing vidu and is willing to accept his complicitness in this defiance of God. But I did it because I was afraid that I would have a rebellion on my hands, because Jewish voices for peace are very aggressive, and they would have attacked me, and I didn't want to get into a civil war. Okay, please forgive my offense and come back with me, and I will bow low to the Lord. But Shmuel said to Shaul, I will not go back with you, for you have rejected the Lord's command, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Shmuel turned to leave, and here's a little bit of license that the translator has taken, Shaul seized the corner of his robe and it tore. Okay? Now, the question we're going to ask in a minute, whose garment tore? The corner of the robe. It really says of his robe. Shaul seized the corner of his robe. Whose robe did Shaul seize? Did he seize Shmuel's garment, or did he seize his own garment? Okay, so we're going to see. And it tore. And it says, and it tore. It doesn't say, and he tore it. Okay, so it seems to have been an accident that whoever's garment tore, it happened on its own. And Shmuel said to him, the Lord has this day torn the kingship over Israel away from you and has given it to another who was worthier than you. In other words, there are no coincidences. The fact that this garment has torn is actually a sign from God that your monarchy has now been torn away from you and is being given to somebody else. Moreover, Netzach Yisrael, the eternity of Israel. He translated as glory of Israel, but that's not really a correct translation. Netzach Yisrael means the eternity of Israel does not deceive or change his mind, for he is not a human that he should change his mind. And what some of the commentaries point out is that what Shmuel was pointing out to Shaul is that even though Hashem told me, Nichamti, I have remorse or regret that I appointed Shaul as king, it doesn't mean that God sort of had one state of mind at one point and then changed his mind at another point. No. What it simply means is that God knew in advance. Just like any time you find in the Torah that it says nichamti, God says, I have remorse. It doesn't mean that he's changed his mind, because God is immutable. He doesn't change. So what Shmuel was saying to Shaul was, it's not that God didn't realize that you were going to make this mistake. God knew that you were going to make this mistake, but he appointed you as king at this particular juncture in Jewish history, which is the only time when we had an opportunity to completely and utterly annihilate Amalek, and Hashem decided that you would be king during that time. And he did it because he knew that humanity was not ready for this act to be performed at this particular time. And therefore, it's not that Hashem changed his mind and his plans were foiled. It's that everything that Hashem orchestrated up until this point, including the failure to destroy Amalek, was orchestrated by Hashem. But at the same time, God does not change his mind. And God says, as a consequence of your inability to destroy Amalek, you can no longer be king. We need to bring somebody else who has a certain streak of personality that you do not possess to be the next king. And that's how King David is brought in. And as we all know, King David has some foreign blood in him. He's got Moabite blood, which makes him a little bit more perhaps discompassionate, shall we say, a little bit less sensitive, because he's got this Moabite streak in him. But maybe that's what's needed in order to be the king. But Saul pleaded, I did wrong. Please honor me in the presence of the elders of my people and in the presence of Israel, and come back with me until I have bowed low to the Lord your God. And so as the commentaries say, this was a different request, because Shaul's first request is, come back with me and I will bow low to the Lord. For my sake, save my embarrassment. And that, Shmuel said, I'm not going to do. But here the request is, honor me in the presence of the elders of my people and in the presence of Israel. I don't want the people of Israel, especially not the elders, to have to feel that they have sinned. And so therefore, come with me, let them see the dignity of their king, so that they do not feel disheartened when I come back all crestfallen. Please accompany me. And so Shmuel said, for that I will, not for your sake, but for the sake of the nation and of the elders. So Shmuel followed Saul back, and Saul bowed low to the Lord. And then the Haftorah, the last part of that Torah, which we're not going to see today, is where Shmuel himself assassinates King Agag in a very aggressive way. And that's how the Haftorah comes to an end. Okay? And he basically tells him, your sword was filled with the blood of innocent women and children, and therefore your sword will never be active ever again. And he gives Agag his just deserts. Okay? In any event, I just want to share just a couple of postscripts with you in addition to what we've already pointed out. First of all, the Talmud says, this is the Talmud in Tractate Yoma. Let's look at it together. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Mipnei Malu Nimshecha Malchut Beit Shaul. Why is it that the monarchy and the dynasty of King Saul did not continue? Why was it so violently interrupted after this episode and given to a completely different family in Israel? Mipnei Shelo Hayabo Shum Dofi. So the Gemara answers because there was no flaw in Saul's family line. There was nothing incriminating in King Saul's family line. He had impeccable yichus. And someone like that cannot continue as the king. That sounds counterintuitive, right? So the Talmud explains itself. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud Sadak, Ein ma'amidin parnas al hatzibur, ela imkein kupa shel shratzim tlulo mi'achorav. You do not appoint a leader over the community unless he has a closet full of skeletons in his family line. Now, why does the Talmud say that? So it says, she'im tazuach da'ato alav, because if he becomes too haughty, omrim lo chazor la'achorecha. We tell him, hey, take a look over your back, look over your shoulder and see the family history that you have. And this will humble you. So it seems from this first statement of the Talmud that what was Saul's fatal flaw? What was his fatal flaw that could not allow him to continue? He was too perfect. It was a haughtiness, perhaps. There was nothing that could humble him or incriminate him from his past. Now, that seems to be contradictory to the text itself. Because what did Shmuel tell Saul? He says, are you so small in your eyes that you have to listen to the people? Right? And Saul himself said, I was afraid that the people were going to rebel against me. So now let's look at the next statement of the Talmud. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Mipnei ma ne'ena Shaul. Why was Shaul punished? Mipnei shemachal al kivodo. Because he was forbearing and forgiving over any offenses to his honor. And how do we know that? Shenemar, the 4 chapters prior in the book of Shmuel, it says, Uvinei v'lial amru, ma yisha'enu zeh, vayivazehu v'lo hiviu lo mincha vayihi kemacharish. At the end of chapter 10 in Shmuel Aleph, it says that right after Shaul was coronated, there were people in the crowd, just like in any populist crowd. You're going to have, let's say, you could pick Moshe Rabbeinu to be your leader, to be the next rabbi, but you're always going to have a small percentage saying, him? You chose him? What does he have? He's a gornished, he's a nobody, he's a loser. And that's exactly what happened. There were people who said about King Shaul, he's a loser. How is this man going to be able to save us? They disparaged him, and he pretended he didn't hear a word. In other words, even though their voice carried, and he did hear them, he said nothing. So you're seeing a completely contradictory statement in the Gemara that seems to contradict its previous statement. The previous statement is that he had nothing incriminating to humble him in his past. And now you're seeing that perhaps he was overly humble and forgiving of his honor. So first of all, I don't think that this is a contradiction. A person who was brought up without any tension or confrontation in his life never had to fight against the school bullies because he was brought up with a silver spoon, let's say, and was always protected from harmful elements, even though he comes from absolutely perfect pedigree, but may not know how to step up and face confrontation. And I think that it's not that Shaul was humble, but there may have been a certain timidity to his personality, simply because when you come from a rough family background, so then you know that there's a certain ability to face adversity, because you've had to defend yourself in the past. What's that? Street smarts. You're a little bit scrappy and you know how to fight for yourself. And that's what David HaMelech's family represents, is that there were people, even before David became king, who would constantly disparage him. The Gemara actually talks about this and says that people would talk behind David's back, saying, "This guy, who is he? After all, he comes from he's not even Jewish. He's not even allowed to be part of the Jewish community. His great grandmother was a Moabite, and Moabites are not permitted to become part of the Jewish people." So this was part of David's history, and that's why he had the ability to be humbled, but also had some street smarts to know how to go up against people and not to be intimidated by people. So that's one understanding of it. I also want to point out that one of the characteristics of a person who is not used to adversity and facing challenges is that they act erratically during their first time when they have to face confrontation and struggle, and not be able to handle the tension of that confrontation well. And I think that's the whole idea behind the tearing of the garment. You see, this was the first time in King Saul's life that he had been rejected. He was a tall, handsome man that really, he always got the top grades in university and was the best bacher in yeshiva, and everything was great for him, and that's why he was chosen as king. And the first time in his life that someone tells him, "You failed," he couldn't handle it. He says, "No, it's impossible." And that's the grabbing of the garment, which shows that he doesn't know how to handle failure. And if a person does not know how to handle failure, they cannot be the king. Because the king has to know that, yes, I botched this, and I'm going to get up again and try again. This is what Shlomo HaMelech says in Sefer Mishlei, which is why I have the pasuk in front of you. Ki sheva yipol tzadik vakam, that a tzaddik can fall down 7 times and always get up. U'reshaim yikashlu bara. By contrast, the wicked person, the bad person, once they fall, they stay down and they just descend further and further and further. Right? What did you want to say, Rachel?
Sometimes when we challenge our times, until we reach out to Hashem. And so we develop that relationship with Hashem. And so because he has had these kinds of challenges, he's going to have the opportunity to develop and understand the importance of Hashem, which is why he made people more important and their own decisions.
Very, very possible. Yeah, that could have been a reason why he was so intimidated by the people, is because he had always been a people pleaser. He always felt that, deep down within every person is a certain insecurity, especially the person who's never failed before. There's an insecurity. What if I fail this time?
Story, my husband said it, and you can know which Rav it's talking about. Someone was trying to be a Rav, and he didn't have very good yichus. He had good yichus, and so most people said, "Oh, he has good yichus, he'll be great at it," or whatever. But he said, "Fresh bright is besser out." You know that story?
I don't. I'm sure I heard it from Peter.
Yeah, like good. Fresh bread is better than what was the past. It's not my yichus.
That's right.
It's what I am today. That's
Yes.
more important.
Exactly. And what we're seeing is to the contrary. Sometimes that yichus can be a liability. I think, the reason why I think this is an important idea to discuss, especially today, is I was just listening yesterday to a podcast by Dan Senor, who has this amazing podcast called Call Me Back, which is all about what's going on in Israel today. He's the fellow who wrote the book Startup Nation, just in case if that name doesn't jog your memory. And he's there just was a report that was issued either, I think, over the weekend or maybe Friday, that goes over, it hasn't been in the media because there's so many other things that in the world media today, but it's very, very critical for the future of the state of Israel. It is a report on everything that went wrong on October 7th. Why we botched it, why our intelligence failed, why our military failed. And it's worth a listen because it's really, really quite important. One of the fatal flaws of Israeli intelligence and Israeli militia was the false belief that we are impervious to an attack from Hamas. They looked at Hamas as the JV, the junior varsity, that it could never have the power because we're the Jews, right? And these schlechte Menschen are never going to be able to be able to do anything other than, you know, carry knives or AK-47s, but they're not going to have a concerted planned attack like this. And that was one of the fatal flaws of October 7th. And the important thing is, and this is what we're seeing demonstrated by the people of Israel today, is number one, to be humbled by that horrible defeat, not to cover it over, but to learn from it and to be able to pick ourselves up and to be able to say, we were haughty. It was a haughtiness that we had because we felt that we were the Jewish people, we were the best thing in the world, and we didn't have the necessary humility of that kupa shel shrotzim, that closet of skeletons, to feel that we were vulnerable. And the only way and this was one of the same mistakes they said 50 years ago during the Yom Kippur War, they made the same mistake. And this is a perennial error within the human condition. So the next thing I wanted to mention is the Medrash asks, actually, we're not going to have time for this. I just want to go over this last point from Rabbi Eliezer Sorotskin, who was a Rav in Eretz Yisrael not too long ago. And he says that the final thing that caused Shaul to lose his monarchy was when he tore the garment. He says, Ba'afal pichein adain lo huchlat sofit lokachat mimenu et hamalucha ulaha'avira la'acher. He says, until Shaul caused the garment to be torn, it wasn't completely decided that he would lose the monarchy and it would be given to someone else. Ubifrat kefi shehagimara misaperet sheshmuel hitpalel kol halayla letovat Shaul. One of the psukim that we didn't have a chance to go over is that when God first told Shmuel, that Shaul was going to be removed, Shmuel davened for Shaul the entire night. And it seems to have made a dent where God was willing to reconsider. And then after Shmuel said, I'm not going to accompany you to save your honor, right? Uverov kaso al Shmuel karalo et bigdo, and it was Shaul's great impetuous sort of fright or anger or whatever you want to call it. He grabbed onto his garment and it tore. Az huchlat sofit shetzrichim limsor et hamalucha lemishu acher hatov mimenu. That was the final blow. Shaul, you can't even get a hold of yourself. Gain your composure. Ki im kol harachmanut v'ha'anivut ne'elamot bishat negiya atzmit. Ad kedei likroa beged as I efshar liyot melech. Because of all of your due mercy and humility that you had when it came to going out to war, is now all of that disappears because your own personal honor is at stake. That's a sign that you can't be king anymore. In other words, there was a certain self-interest or self-preservation that Shaul was concerned about, to the point where he couldn't handle losing now that honor and that integrity in the eyes of the public. That's not someone who can be king. In order to be king, you have to be prepared to have the people throw tomatoes at you. You have to be prepared to make unpopular decisions and to be derided because at the end of the day, regardless of what the public thinks, I know that I'm doing and saying the right thing. I'm going to actually speak a little bit more about this on Shabbos because it's been on my mind a lot. Anyway, questions, comments before we let you go for the day?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. In the book of Yehoshua, when the people are conquering the land, it just seems like when they conquered a nation that they just killed everybody. Is that not true?
That they killed everybody in the times of Yehoshua?
Yeah.
No, first of all, they gave everyone the opportunity to flee the land. There was not there was no order of genocide. And it was only the soldiers that they defeated. They were allowed, if memory serves me, I have to go back and look at all the psukim, but there was never a commandment to kill the women and children, not at all.
The other thing I want to say is you talk about Shaul being a populist leader. I
Yeah.
was reading a book about Esther and politics in the book of Esther, and it says that Ahasuerus was also a populist leader, that he did parties, he wanted everyone to approve of him.
What's
and
the name of the book?
I think it's Politics in the Book of Esther. I know I'll send you a copy. I'll send you a link if
A
you're
link.
interested.
Okay, great.
It says that he wouldn't say no to anyone. It also reminds me of Trudeau.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Okay, bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. And B'ezras Hashem, we will have a class next Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit about the Megillah and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.